You're listening to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast, episode number 77. Welcome to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. I'm your host, Paula Price, lawyer turned certified executive coach. This podcast was created to empower women lawyers just like you to create a life and practice you love. Join me every week for a break from the hustle so we can focus on you, what you truly want, and how you can create it. If you're over the overwhelm, done with putting out fires, and ready to redefine success on your own terms, you're in the right place. Ready for today's episode? Let's dive in. Hello, my friend. Welcome back to the podcast. It's Paula here, and I'm so excited to have you here this week. Episode 77. Can you believe it? That number resonates more than any other podcast number to date because it's the year that I was born. So what can we say about the 1977 vintage? For all of my fellow 1977ers, welcome. Lovely to have you here. Now, today we have a very special episode. We've got an amazing guest speaker. Her name is Stephanie Mitchell, and I'm going to turn you over to our interview in just a moment. But before I do that, I wanted to give the heads up to all of you that I will be opening a membership program effective January 1st, 2023. And in the next few weeks, I'm going to be sharing with you more about that program. So I wanted to plant the idea, let it percolate for a little bit, because it's something that I think is going to be incredible. I think it's going to be life-changing, and I want you to join me. So what does it involve? At the moment, I'm still putting the pieces together, ironing out the details, but I have been a member of various coaching communities, and I know how amazing it can be to be surrounded by people who are just like you, who speak the same language, who have big goals, who have big dreams, and who are looking to be in a community with others who are like them. And they are also looking to have someone else take the reins in terms of where to put the focus. And to that end, I have been working on a curriculum for next year. It starts out with reclaiming leadership, rebuilding self-trust, and redefining success. That's the first month I've got in store for us. And it builds on there, going through themes, some of which we've been covering in the podcast, others which we have not. And the idea there is to build a practice, to build month after month on themes and skills and work toward your goals in a container where you are given support, where you are given tools, where you are given coaching, and it is going to be amazing. So if this is something that is of interest to you, I would love to hear from you. I will put you on a wait list, and that way I can be sure to notify you as the details unfold. So you can do that by sending me an email, notifying me on LinkedIn. On the show notes, there will be a place where you can submit a form with your name, your email address. Just let me know that you're interested in the membership. You know where to find me. And I would love to hear from you because I would love for you to be part of this community. It's going to be amazing. So with that, I am going to turn us over to today's episode. I'm going to introduce you to Stephanie, and you are going to love our conversation. We talk about words, my friends. Words as a way to connect. And I think you're going to love hearing from Stephanie. I think you're going to be inspired in terms of how you use language. And of course, she's just a delightful human being. So hopefully our conversation will really resonate with you. So if you're interested in the membership, please don't be shy. Let me know. I would love to hear from you. And I hope you enjoy today's episode. Go 77. Bye for now. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. It's Paula here, and I'm so excited that you could join me here this week. We have a very special guest today. Her name is Stephanie Mitchell. If you are not familiar with Stephanie, you're going to love meeting her. She is a writing coach and consultant, and she is also a professional speaker. So she speaks at law firms and other professional organizations about writing and about communication topics. And I'm so glad that she's here with us today. Stephanie is a law school graduate, and she's also a graduate of journalism. And so what that means is she's able to take her law experience and also her journalism degree and apply it in a very interesting and unique way. And I'm so excited to have her here today and to talk with her about all things words and communication. Welcome, Stephanie. It is such a pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you, Paula. I'm so happy to be here. I have just been amazed, actually, at this wonderful podcast you've been producing for the last couple of years now, and with such interesting topics and guests. So it's a real honor to be here with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. I love your positive feedback. And absolutely, it is such a blessing to be able to have guests like you come on the podcast and talk about the work that you're doing. And so grateful to have you here today and excited to hear what you have to share. So to maybe orient our listeners, we would love to know more about yourself and the work that you do.
Sure. You gave me such a great introduction there, but I'll say you could sum it all up by saying I focus on words, or I specialize in words, and helping people think about the right words, whether they're writing or whether they're speaking, when they're communicating with someone else, when they're trying to reach someone else and speak clearly and passionately and persuasively. And so the way I do that is through small workshops, often with lawyers, sometimes with judges, engineers, other professionals, where we talk about that kind of clear writing, effective public speaking. I also give keynote talks at conferences, other big group events about communication. And I work with people one-on-one to do individual writing coaching as well.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Stephanie. And in preparing for today's interview, I looked on your website and I came across this lovely video that you have, and I listened and watched it, and you really drive home your passion for words and how words are really the building block for human connection. And I'm so excited that we get to talk more about that today. Even in the way you described what you do, I was thinking about the words that you were choosing and how intentional you are and how precise. And I think for all of us listening, this is such a great opportunity to be aware and mindful of the words that we're choosing to express ourselves and how we can choose words that will allow us to better connect and communicate the messages that we're really trying to share. I mentioned in the introduction, Stephanie, that you have a background in both law and journalism. And I would love for you to share with our listeners how it is that you got from where you were to where you are now.
Yes, I'd be happy to tell you more about that, because it is a story with some twists and turns, like many of us have, but it does all make sense now to me. When I finished law school, I had spoken to quite a few lawyers as I went through, and I enjoyed law school. But when I talked to lawyers about what they did every day, I knew it wouldn't be a great fit for me to be practicing as a lawyer. And I also knew you had to work really hard. And so I wasn't sure if I didn't love it, if that's what I should do. So I went back to journalism, and I worked for CBC Radio in Vancouver at that point as a news reporter and a producer. And over the years, I worked for CBC. I worked in law school administration at universities, and I worked in government communications. And I kept thinking, why do I have both of these degrees, the law degree and the journalism degree? They seem so separate. But one day it all came together for me. I still remember it. It was in the summer of 2015. My husband and I were in Vienna. We were very lucky. We were on a vacation, and we were sitting outside having breakfast at this little hotel. And all of a sudden I looked at my husband and I said, what if I could just talk about words for a living? And he smiled, and it sounded like this crazy idea. But then we got to talking more, and it just made so much sense with my background, with journalism, with working at CBC Radio, where I'd really learned to focus on using the best words to capture your listeners' attention and painting, pictures in your reader's mind. And then, but also thinking about my training in law school and how I could potentially work with lawyers to help them. And so I slowly built my business to where I am now. And now it all makes so much sense, having the journalism and the law degree. And I have to say, I just love it. I love working with people and seeing their eyes light up. I love helping people kind of reach that next level, because especially lawyers are good writers to start with. And I love helping them polish and just get up a little bit higher to become even better at their craft.
I love that, Stephanie. I love that story that you just shared about being in Vienna. I mean, speaking about painting a picture, I can just imagine sitting out in this beautiful European city and having this aha moment. It delights me. And I think what you said too about it kind of just like being this thing, right? This moment that happened. And from there, you were able to build your career on that. And just to clarify, in terms of some of the speaking engagements, some of the workshops that you're doing, what is it that you're working on? You mentioned it's writing. Like, what kind of topics are you exploring?
So often I talk about clear writing. And we look a lot at how important it is to take time to gather your thoughts before you start writing. This is something that keeps coming up as well in my individual writing coaching with lawyers. I notice, we're all in a hurry. We have so much on our plates that we just want to get it done, just get our thoughts out there. But if we can take some time to gather our thoughts before we get started, to really think about who we're writing to and what our key message is, what we really want to say, that can actually save so much time in the writing and make the writing much stronger, more effective. So that's one part of what I talk about. I also talk about, using less or using fewer legalese words, not getting stuck on the pursuant to in every sentence, and thinking about having short sentences that are easy to understand, thinking about using fewer acronyms and defined terms, really making your writing more elegant, I would say, so that it doesn't just look, like a court document. It should look like a beautiful court document. And though they do exist, I know that out there. But so really thinking about stripping away some of the maybe legal crutches we can fall back on to seem like we're really professional. We really know what we're doing, but they're not always as precise as choosing the right word and writing a sentence that paints a picture in your reader's head, which can really help convince them much more than stuffing it full of legalese words. So I talk a lot about that in writing. In my presenting public speaking workshops over the last couple of years, I've spoken a lot about how we can communicate more effectively through Zoom and video conferencing, with clients and with each other in court, and bringing some of the humanity back to that so that it's more like in person, as opposed to everyone isolated in front of their own individual screens. And I think that's a common theme that runs through everything I do, which is connecting with the person you're writing to, or you're speaking to, or you're presenting to. Always really thinking about that other person and trying to get out of yourself, even if it is just you in the room on your own in front of that screen.
I love that. Stephanie, you do such beautiful work. And I have to say, you got me when you used the word elegant. Of all the words out there, that's one that I really love. I had somebody describe it once as simple and effective. And so that's how elegant or elegance shows up in my mind. And I think elegant writing, where you manage to make that point, simple, effective, cut out all the excess, again, looking at that, painting a picture in somebody's mind, set it off for me.
Can I just say?
Yeah, absolutely.
Just thinking about the word elegant, I remember the first time I heard the word used for a math equation. Ooh, and I had never thought of a math equation as being elegant. And then I realized, oh yes, this can be everywhere, this beauty and simplicity. So
absolutely.
To add that.
And going back to that moment in Vienna, so clearly you were interested in making something out of your love for words. And I would love to know how it is that you developed your love of words in the first place.
Sure. Let's say first, I grew up in a family of readers. Both my parents are big readers, and all my grandparents, there were always all kinds of books around. But I think the other key, I'm so lucky, I actually grew up in a children's library because my mom is a teacher librarian, or was a teacher librarian. She's retired now. And so often in the afternoons or on the weekends, if she was doing some extra work, I would be hanging out in the library with her. And, at first I'd just be sitting on the ground in front of the easiest books, reading them while she worked. And later she'd get me to do little jobs for her, like writing poems if she was going to have a seasonal display for spring coming. And I look back at those poems now and they're terrible, but I loved writing them and thinking about them and being inspired. And there were children's book authors coming through town, and my mom would know. So we would go to the reading at the public library, and I would attend, and I just see how much magic there could be through stories and words when I was sitting there as a little girl, that I think that really put that love of words in me early on. And now, of course, I'm a big reader and I talk about words professionally. And so it just keeps going, keeps building on itself.
I love that story, Stephanie. You remind me of when I was in grade 2 or 3 in primary school, and they brought out the dictionaries, which when you're that young, they're dictionaries with pictures attached and all that. Mm-hmm. And just being kind of baffled in the loveliest way that there was a book that was designated or dedicated to having words in it. And any word that you could think of, at that point, in grade 2 or grade 3, it was in there. And it was such a magical experience. So I just love this idea of you sitting there from a young age in the library surrounded by books and being able just to explore that world. And clearly it became a real passion for you. One of the things that you mentioned earlier was this idea of communication and connection. And when you bring those two together, if you look at the words as building blocks for the connection that people can form with each other, how do you see that relationship? How do you see words as building connections between people or being able to build connections between people?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think on the simplest level, words are how we can take what's inside of ourselves and put it out there to give to someone else or to share with someone else. And so they have this real power, to draw someone in, to captivate another person and make that connection, bring you closer together. Or your word could be pushing the other person apart. If your words are away, if your words are aggressive and loud and angry, or maybe they're indifferent. And so then you're putting words out there and the other person doesn't care. They don't really notice. So I think that's where some of the power comes from. And a lot of it is in our intention with the words when we're bringing them out and we're trying to communicate with the other person. And that's, again, why it's so important to always think of that other person when you're choosing your words and what will work to kind of bridge that divide between you and make that connection in the middle so you can meet.
It is so beautiful, Stephanie. I've never really thought of words in that way, but you're absolutely right. I mean, there are words you can choose that would bring you closer together, or there are words you could choose that would have the opposite effect. And so I think even just having that concept, that framework in mind when we're choosing our language is so helpful and so powerful. And the listeners would not have the benefit of seeing your body language, but as you were speaking, and for everyone listening, it was really neat. As Stephanie was speaking, she was using her arms to show bringing closer and then using her arms to indicate pushing away. And again, going back to creating that image in the mind's eye based on the language being used and the way that you're speaking, it's just so powerful. So thank you. Stephanie, where do you see, you mentioned you are training, you're coaching. Where do you see people struggling the most when it comes to connecting through words?
That's a big question. As I mentioned earlier, we all have so much on our plates right now. We have so much to do. And this fall actually seems to be the busiest in living memory for me. And I think many people my age, in my mid-40s, it seems like we all have so many things to do that are now in person again, plus virtual things that were added during COVID. And there's so much. And that's work and personal. So I think we all feel like we just need to get it done. We need to do this writing or make this presentation or have this meeting and get it over with. And so I think that's a big struggle for connecting because that's only taking each of us as an individual into account and not the other person you're trying to connect with or communicate with. So you're in your own head. And if you could just take a moment to slow down and gather your thoughts and really think about that other person, think about what you want to say, I think that really helps with the connection. So the struggle really comes in just trying to get it done, which sometimes we have to do. I completely understand. But when we can, it's if we can take that time to take a breath before trying to communicate or connect, that can be incredibly helpful. It also helps ground us as well when we're speaking. And that helps us, I think, speak more sincerely and be more ourselves as well, not just a rushed kind of cartoon version of ourselves.
I love that, Stephanie. And I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I feel like this September was the tsunami September and October was dealing with the aftermath of the tsunami. And we're recording November 1st, which is kind of like a breath of fresh air. And the way that you tied that into the way that we engage with others is, I think that's so impactful, because you're right. It really is creating that presence with the other person, as you said, right? It's thinking about it from their perspective. It's pausing, it's taking a breath, it's being grounded, because ultimately we're focused on that connection. We're focused on that communication. And if you're not really there, right? If you're mentally in the next task already, then it makes it so much harder, if not impossible, to genuate that true connection in the moment. So I think that's a really wonderful point to raise, because especially for all of us who are running around to the next thing, what are we missing, right? If we're not focused on the connection that is right in front of us. So thank you for that. Stephanie, you have this wonderful journalism background, and Stephanie and I have had many conversations before. We've known each other for a few years now, which is wonderful. And so I've had the benefit of chatting with her about this idea of needing to grab attention at the beginning, right? That you kind of have, I don't know how long, Stephanie, you would estimate you have before you lose your reader or your audience. But what strategies can we use to capture people's attention on the first try, in the first few moments?
Again, it's thinking about taking that pause before you speak. And this even before you're preparing, you're pausing to think about what to say. That will be most effective. You're thinking about that other person and how you can reach them. But also, if you're making a presentation or speaking publicly, pausing before you start to speak lets everyone in the room take a breath too, and just get ready for what you might say next. So that can be really helpful as well, not just rushing in, but having that physical pause there. Also, I think in writing, thinking about how your writing looks is something we take for granted. And if your writing looks overwhelming, it's like your first impression if you were meeting in person or by video. And I don't know, maybe you had really messy hair and a big stain on your shirt, and the other person meeting you might not think you looked like a professional at that point. If you send a person a piece of writing, maybe by email or another document, and it's just one big paragraph of gigantic words that are hard to understand, that's overwhelming. And the person immediately wants to push it off and push it back to deal with later, although they really never feel like dealing with it. But even if you're thinking about how your writing looks, and maybe it's a longer email, but you have some bolded headings in it, or you right away get to the point, that's really helpful for the person to capture their attention, know why they want to keep reading. And I'd say that in general, whether you're writing or speaking, if you can lead from the top, as we say in journalism, get that most important information out there right away, or maybe answer their question right away, or ask them the question you're looking for right away, then you get their attention, because that helps give them context for everything else that comes. And it shows them what's important, because you're not wasting a lot of time on a big lead up to it. Though, that said, we still want to be polite and friendly and respectful, and take some time for that too. So, you don't always just want to jump in really aggressively and here's what I need. But so thinking about being friendly, polite, but also leading from the top, getting to your main point fairly quickly. That helps. I
love all of this, Stephanie. And I think it ties in beautifully with what you said at the beginning, right? It's about taking the time to prepare and to be intentional about what you want to say, because I think it's easier to take the kitchen sink and empty it into an email and not need to do the triage. but when you do that work for your reader or in conversation with the person you're speaking with, you're able to parse out what really matters and then present it to them, right? Ideally in a beautiful way, right? It's the difference between going out and getting the groceries and preparing the 5-course meal. And what you are talking about really is that 5-course meal. So I love that, right? And I think that's an extension of the graciousness, like the politeness of engaging with somebody else. The other thing that you mentioned, this pause, I struggle with this a lot, right? I feel like there's this instinct to fill the silence. And yet the pause is so powerful, right? When you can put a pause into the conversation, give space to that other person to process their own thoughts, it is so powerful in all communication. I use that also in coaching conversations, right? Where I'll just allow that silence. And sometimes that's when people have their biggest aha moments, right? It's like the Vienna moments come when we allow ourselves the gift of just pausing. And if you don't mind, I would love for you to share a little bit about your keynote, because I think it might be aligned with what we're talking about. Is that right, Stephanie? Or
Yes, absolutely. I'm such a big believer in this. When I set out to write a keynote and find a topic that interested me, well, first I thought, well, what do people need? What appeals to them? And then I realized, no. It has to be something that I am fascinated by, that then I think I can share and will be helpful to people. And so my keynote is called The Strength of Silence. And I'm working from this idea that we have so much noise in our worlds right now, pings and phone notifications and loud advertising and other people's mobile devices. Everything is in our world trying to grab our attention all the time. And so I became really interested in the idea of silence and how we have used silence over time in history for communicating, for reflection, even before we communicate, and then in the actual communication. And then now I want to explore how we could be more intentional about adding silence to our lives. Of course, we can't escape all the noise that is out there, and there's times for it, but I think we can carve out parts of our day, parts of our week, parts of our year that are intentionally more silent, that give us time to pause, to reflect, and even to listen and to hear other important people in our lives, whether that's personally or professionally. So yes, I am just fascinated with this idea of silence and how we could use it.
I love that. And I think for everyone listening too, it's being intentional with how we bring silence into our lives and how we use silence in communication to make points, right? To make it more impactful. And even as you were describing your keynote, the way that you used silences and pauses, it really resonated. It's really powerful. We mentioned earlier, we were talking about this idea of virtual communications, there's in-person communications. And I think over the pandemic, we all became a lot more proficient at Zoom meetings, at using the phone, other forms of virtual communication. And I'm wondering over that period, how you may have seen people who were struggling, how maybe they struggled to connect, and how they might be able to foster connection when they're not able to meet physically in person.
It's a lot to think about because we've shifted so quickly as a society. Like, yes, I know some companies already were having video meetings before 2020. Other companies, we've had video conferencing for ages. But for so many of us, we did the majority of our work in person, in an office with another person. We made a presentation to another person in the office. You probably went to court and made your presentation to the judge in person. All these things you meet with your clients in person, then everything has shifted to becoming virtually. Some of it we're going back to in person, and now we have this hybrid work environment. I think one of the big things when you're thinking about virtual communication is remembering it actually is more work than meeting in person. And it's really important to be aware of that because there's so much our brains do without us noticing when we're meeting in person. Like, I am reading your body language. I'm seeing how your eyes might crinkle when you smile. I'm noticing how you might pull back if I ask you a question that makes you uncomfortable. All those different body cues I'm picking up and I'm reading and I'm adapting to without even knowing that I'm doing that. And really, we were designed to do that, to interact with other humans that way. That's why it's quite easy to do that. But when we're speaking through a screen or on the phone, we have so many fewer cues to pick up about each other. And that means our brains have to work even harder to get those cues and process them, which takes away from some of our kind of computing power for speaking and for communicating with the other person, ironically, even as we're working so hard. So trying to, again, being intentional, thinking about how this communication, you could make it as much like in person as possible and giving as many cues as you can. So even things like if you feel comfortable sharing your background, then share your actual background, because you're then letting people see where you are, what the light is like in your house, even if it's a blank wall. That gives me more information about you than a virtual background that you've chosen. Although I do get a little information by what you've chosen, of course. But thinking about how to keep that kind of just like if we were in person, and having, a good microphone so that your voice sounds as much like your voice would sound in person, as opposed to quite a pixelated, funny version of you that's more like a robot. It's harder to then connect with that. But, working with the resources that you have. And I think another thing to think about too, when we're communicating, by Zoom or over the phone, is because we can, sometimes we now have Zoom meetings back to back, right? You don't need to walk over to a different office building or go outside or go to court, whatever it is. So you've got your meetings at 9, 10, 11, 11:30, 12. But actually, as humans, I think it's too much to do it all back to back, because we still need to process this communication we've had. We still need to think about it and reflect on it, decide what is important that maybe came out of it, and maybe make a decision based on that about something else before we go into the next meeting. So even taking that time to take a breath, to really get ready for the meeting before you walk in to it, over Zoom or over the phone. Before, we would do that as we're walking down the hall to go to that person's office. Already our brain is naturally going there without us thinking about it. But now we need to add some of those rituals in almost to help us prepare so that we can be really present when we're speaking to that person electronically.
Absolutely. I love that, Stephanie. And for everyone who's listening and doesn't have the benefit of seeing Stephanie speak, it is really lovely and interesting to see how you use body language as well we're on Zoom recording this episode. And so I can see Stephanie smiling. I can see how she nods her head. I can see how she's sitting. I can see she's got a guitar in the background. So all of these things that, like you're saying, Stephanie, allow me to experience more of what you're experiencing. I can read what is going on with you as we are communicating. And to me, that really fosters my sense of connection with you. So even though we're not physically in the same space, I very much feel like we're connected. And I love what you said at your last point too, because I think this is something that, especially in the tsunamis of the fall, where we're all rushing and busy, there's that temptation. And I've done this before, and I've learned the hard way not to schedule the back-to-back Zoom, even though it's completely doable. Technology-wise, you can do it. But I think building in a little bit of flex time between meetings, just to allow one meeting to kind of download into your brain and process a little bit before you jump into the next, because it really does take a toll. I know for myself, the Zoom fatigue on days where I have, 6 hours of Zoom back to back, it's a very different feeling from 6 hours of in-person meetings, which might be exhausting in a completely separate way, but we have control sometimes, not always, over our schedules. And so if we can build in some time, such a great suggestion. Here's another question for you, Stephanie. And again, this goes back to conversations we've had from the outset. So this goes back a few years, but I remember you talking about in-person seminars that you were delivering and how you loved being in the room with people because you would be able to see their eyes light up. And I just love this. And I would love for you to share with our listeners how you experience that. Like, how does that happen when you're in that context?
So it's wonderful even for you to ask me the question, because then I picture people's eyes lighting up. So that makes me feel really good. I think this is when I'm sharing something, I've researched it, I have this experience, and then I want to share it with people so that I can help them, maybe approach a problem from a different way, help them see their writing or their speaking in a different way. And it's that aha moment when I see the light bulb goes off in their head and they're, oh, okay, I get it. And it can often be very quiet, very subtle. But as a speaker, as a teacher and a coach, to me, it's just the best feeling in the world. Because I think what we really want to do is help people and help people understand, but they have to come to it on their own. We can guide them there, give them tools, but it's when they're kind of like grabbing on to the tool that's when that aha moment comes. And I just think it's wonderful. And, that's actually one of the things I found the most difficult about the pandemic. I do a lot of workshops over Zoom now, although I'm happy to say I'm going back to in-person as well. But over Zoom, you don't always see it. Sometimes you can see it a bit. Sometimes people's cameras aren't on for whatever reason. And you just have the fewer cues about people. And also people are more aware that they have a camera on them. So they're not as natural in front of the camera. So I have really missed that over the past couple of years, but I've learned to even take small things like a smile or a positive comment. I did a big workshop for Toronto Metropolitan University's law practice program a couple of months ago, and their candidates were really into using the tiny little emojis that float up the screen with love it and sounds great. And actually at first I thought, oh, I don't know if that'll be distracting, but I loved it as it turns out because it helped me know, this is resonating with them. They're getting this. And that was wonderful for me.
I love that. It is so true. And I think going back to what you said about those aha moments, right? It's seeing that somebody else has grasped or they've understood something in a new way. And what you said is so true. They have to do it themselves. You get to be the guide. You can take them to that point. You can give them the tools. But ultimately, that aha moment is them experiencing for themselves or learning or seeing it for the first time in a new way. And that truly is magical. And I also love what you said about the emojis. I think when we're communicating on different Zoom type platforms, I think the more feedback we can give people, the more they're able to read the language, right? Sometimes it might be those bobbing heads. So you're like, okay, yeah, I know that made sense because I see the bobbing heads. Just those cues to know, yes, you're on track. And I guess that goes back to your original point. When we're in person, we get to see other people's body language. We can read those cues at an unconscious level even, whereas on a Zoom, you may not have that same benefit. Moving into a slightly different topic, one of the things that strikes me about the work that you do and the way that you are so passionate about language, I would love to know what you find to be beautiful about words.
I love that question. There are so many things I find beautiful about words. I would say probably the most beautiful to me is how words have the ability to paint a picture in your head, in whoever you're talking to, or if you're reading a book, the author's words paint a picture in your head as well. And it just brings it to life, takes you to another world. I'm here on Vancouver Island right now, and looking out my window, I can see big, tall Douglas firs. I see a maple tree in the distance that's orange with a bit of red on the edge. I've been watching it every day to see how it colors. The sky is light blue with a few clouds. Even there, I've just taken you to my world right now, to my window. And I used words to do that. So I think that's a really amazing thing we can do with words is paint a picture. And it's not always, a visual picture like that, like a painting, but it's also how someone feels, how someone is reacting, or even what's important about a certain set of facts. Whatever it is, you can paint that picture in someone's head with your words.
I love that. And as I'm looking at my window, I'm thinking about the colors on some of the trees outside of my window. And actually, speaking of the story going beyond the visual, I can hear someone knocking downstairs. I think it's the delivery person bringing a book that I've requested. So that's all. That's all.
Something to look forward to later.
Something to look forward to later. But I love that. You're absolutely right. It's about taking somebody else on a journey and using words to describe that journey. It's so great. And I'd love to know, Stephanie, for somebody who is so engaged with language, who loves words so much, if you had to pick a favorite word, if you were to go to a desert island and you were only allowed to pick one, you'd only pack one word in your suitcase, or maybe it's a handful of words, what word or words would you choose?
I love this. And you actually did give me some warning that you would ask this question, which is great because I love so many words and they keep changing in my mind. But I would say today, the words I would choose are dawn and dusk. And I would choose those words because I love liminal concepts and ideas, concepts that are on the edge. This is probably why I like islands as well. They're in between maybe another island or mainland and the ocean. They're on that edge line. And so with dawn, it's such a simple word, D-A-W-N, and it has so much in it. It carries all of the darkness of the night that comes before, and then, the rosy fingers of dawn, of light, of the day that's coming up ahead of it. So it has so much possibility. And then dusk does the same thing so efficiently with just D-U-S-K, but it's a beautiful word if you say it, dusk. and it carries, the brightness of the day, all that happened in it, and then kind of the peace of the night that's coming and the stars that might be coming out. And it's right perched in between there. So I love dawn and dusk.
That is so powerful, Stephanie. And again, coming back to you being able to paint that mental image in someone's mind, I can tell you, you're absolutely painting an image in my mind. And what came to me as you were describing that is very much consonant with some of the work that I do with my coaching clients, right? And I feel like when you said that word edge, I feel like we spend a lot of time on edges, right? These are lawyers and professionals who are trying to get from point A to point B. And there's that, I think you used the word liminal. Is that almost like this point in between? And so when we think about how we live our lives, I would say at any given moment, we're probably on the dawn or in the dawn moments of one thing and in the dusk moments of other things. And so I love that you've described it that way, because I'm going to use that myself when I'm thinking about those things that are kind of now taking place in the rearview mirror versus those that are on the horizon. It's such a beautiful way to think about them. So thank you, dawn and dusk. And like you said, they're simple, they're efficient. Love them.
They convey so much.
Yeah, they absolutely do. I have one last question for you, Stephanie, which is, again, going back to the work that you do and the video that I watched, which I thought was brilliant. For everyone listening, I highly recommend going to Stephanie's website and watching the video. We'll provide a link in the show notes. And you talk about inspiring others through the work that you do. And the question that I have for you is, when it comes to your work, what inspires you?
I would say that excellence inspires me. So that idea of making something more elegant or stronger and getting there. So sometimes I might read an article. The other day, my dad sent me an obituary for a customer he used to work for from the local paper. And it was so well written. And I saved it because it was a really good piece of writing. And so everywhere we can see that idea of excellence. And when I'm working with my clients one-on-one, I was reviewing a lawyer's work this morning, and I saw, his sentences are so much cleaner, so much more direct. This is a really effective document here. And so this idea of excellence, of continuing to reach for something better, of not just being happy, or not happy, but satisfied with how it is now, but always pushing forward towards something that's more excellent. I think that's what really inspires me.
I love that. Again, so powerful, Stephanie. I just love this. Love that idea. Stephanie, for anyone who is wanting to learn more about what you do, about your coaching, about your speaking, about your keynote, where can they find you?
Yes, you can go to my website. It's my name, stephaniecmitchell.com. And you can watch that video. I was so lucky to work with a great videographer in Montreal. If anyone ever wants a name, I'd be happy to share it.
Beautiful. Beautiful. And we'll provide a link in the show notes to your website. And Stephanie, it has been such a pleasure having you on today. So thank you again for joining me here today. Thank you to all of our listeners for tuning in. I know you loved hearing from Stephanie as much as I did. So thank you so much.
My pleasure, Paula. And thank you for inviting me, and keep making your inspiring podcast.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure, and conversation to be continued, my friend.
Absolutely.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
If you enjoyed today's show and don't want to miss an episode, subscribe and follow the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you haven't already, please leave a rating and review. Your feedback will help me create a podcast that's tailored to your needs and goes straight to the heart of what matters to you. For instructions on how to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com/podcast launch. See you next time. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. If you want more information, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com. See you next week.